Ta-da!
All right, ta-da. We are here. All right, everyone. We are with Sophia Avramides. Is that correct?
Avramides. It's however
Avramides.
you, yeah.
All right. She's definitely from the Atreides um, in the Dune saga.
Definitely.
Definitely. Um, but yeah, just we've been wanting to hop on for a long time. Sophia is an awesome herbalist here in the US. Me being, I guess I'd call myself an amateur herbalist. I should probably go with that. Just reaching out to people that I think are doing really cool work and that are cool people and just wanting to really just connect more and get, different perspectives of the herbalists roaming around this planet today, and to just have a fun conversation and see what's going on. So Sophia, well, why don't you can start wherever you want. If you want to tell us where you're from, what you're up to, or you can tell us where you are right now today. I think you're somewhere a little different than usual. You could start there, but I'll let you take it for a bit.
Yeah. So I also, although like herbalism has definitely been what's colored my life in the last, like, I don't know, almost 10 years, I feel like I'm also an amateur herbalist. Like, I feel like there's so much that I don't know. I'm always learning. I'm always like humbled by what I'm not aware of. So I feel you on that. And I mean, I feel like, again, although it's something that I often like share about, learn about, teach about, I feel like I'm just such a student of it. So I just want to start there. Um, I am currently in Los Angeles. I was going to be in the desert right now, but I decided to actually take this call here just because I wasn't sure what the vibe was going to be when I landed. So I decided to do the podcast first, and then I'm going to
Okay.
drive down to the desert, probably listening to podcasts on the way. But yeah, I live in Los Angeles, the Tongva lands, and I'm originally from Massachusetts. I'm from the south coast of Massachusetts, which is where a lot of my herbal curiosity sparked. And it's been really interesting moving here. I moved here about 2.5 years ago, and I'm like just starting to get my footing when it comes to my herbal practice in Southern California now, because it's just such a different climate, ecosystem. Like, it's cool. There's a lot. And also it's vastly different than the Northeast. So I'm
Right.
feeling like I'm now like landing.
Yeah, I bet. What's some of the big differences to you?
Oh man, I mean the rain, of course, like although it's been really rainy here and there has been like lush, growth because of the downpours. Just the climate, like the drier, arid climate, and the general difference in precipitation between
Yeah.
the Northeast and the Southwest. I guess this isn't really the Southwest, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I was actually looking. I bought two farmers almanacs recently to just like peruse around, but they all like in their classifications, they put California, at least the southern part, in the Southwest. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, it like makes sense that it's in the Southwest, but I've always like regionally heard it be described as like Southern California. So,
yeah,
but climate wise, like it's not too different from like New Mexico or,
hmm,
Arizona. Um, so yeah, I guess just that part has been interesting, and like learning desert plants and
hmm,
seeing what's abundant here. Like there's a lot of like roadside plants here that don't grow abundantly in the Northeast. Like I notice mallow everywhere. I don't know if you've been noticing it, but it's just like everywhere. And it's just like common mallow. And, in the Northeast, that would be like mugwort or like mullein. And
yeah,
here it's like mallow and plantain sometimes. Um, Yeah. So like just kind of getting used to that has taken a while. Surprisingly, I didn't think it would take so long. But I think it's also because like when you move, and I'm sure you found this, like when you move to a new place, you're like a plant that's being transplanted and like your
Uh-huh.
roots need to get established. And like sometimes that takes a long time. So you can't really look around at what's around you until like you're established. And
Interesting. Yeah.
did you find that in moving to Peru?
Yeah, definitely. It feels like it takes some time, but I don't know. I can't remember this woman's name, but there's an herbalist who talks about like the practice of, I think she calls it like bio orientation. Um,
Mm.
and just like actually like spending in the beginning, like the first thing to ground is like orienting yourself through like going out and seeing like what are the plants around, like who is here, who's next to me, who will my allies be here, and just kind of like doing that. And um I I feel though like Peru's a lot easier, right? Like my neighborhood is nature. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I walk out and I walk 3 minutes and I'm up against the mountain, walking through the dirt roads outside the house. There's all sorts of, plants along the way. So I feel like it's a lot easier than like orienting when you come into a city in like SoCal. And yeah, it's a lot different for sure. Yeah, I definitely think of Mullen when I think of the East Coast,
Yeah, mullein is
especially, yeah,
it's one of my
it's
favorite
amazing.
plants.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love just
I
like driving down the highway in Virginia and just seeing like tons of mullen along the freeway, and I'm like cleaning the air. Like Mullen's out
Yeah,
there, just like
definitely.
Mullen's out there just working.
Literally just working and like looking badass while it does it. And
Yeah,
it's just, yeah, mullein is such an amazing plant and it's definitely one of
definitely.
my favorite plants. And I mean, like on that note, like, I love what you said about the bio orientation because that tends to be a practice that I have whenever I go somewhere new. So like today going into Palm Springs, I will be taking a walk as soon as I land, which is a practice that I like to have. And I love that phrase for it of being like, okay, like I'm bio orienting, like I'm going to see what's around me. I think anytime I land somewhere new, that is something that I like to do is just drop my things and go on a walk, even if it's like 2 a.m. Um, but yeah, I mean, here I love it. Like I really love it here. I've really landed, I think. I recently moved. So I was living in this really like lovely home for some time and now just upscaled in a lot of ways. And I have a full like lab, like apothecary studio now. And I feel like having a space to be able to like commune with the plants that I'm growing at home and then also like take the information that I'm getting from the outside world and like integrating it into my world, like there's actually a space to do it. And like it's wild, like just around here going on walks, like I keep thinking about olive trees right now. I don't know why, but they're like popping in my
Really?
head. Yeah, like I feel like it's so cool that that's an ornamental plant here, that people plant
Right.
them as a landscaping like art form. And for me, like being Greek and having such rich symbology around olives and like olives, and olive oil and like Greek mythology loving like the olive tree. I just think it's so cool that that exists here. And there's just I feel like there's a lot of like rich like symbolism found in this climate because of what can grow here. There's so much that can
Hmm.
grow. And so I'm kind of like learning to lean into that a little bit. But again, like eternal student, there's so much that I
Yeah,
feel
it's
like I have to
lifetimes.
learn.
It's so many
Mm-hmm.
lifetimes. I'm, yeah, still relinquishing that on a daily basis for sure. It's so interesting you bring up olives because I have been on a olive rabbit hole the past 2 weeks. That's been like my main rabbit hole since I've been back home. Um, and it started with I'm really interested in weather in general. And then particularly, right now with El Nino and all these things. And I was seeing, I just kind of keep track of like where I see news on like droughts and other things happening. And it was like, oh, like heavy droughts in like Spain, Greece in some places, Turkey, Italy. So these are all the traditional, like really big producers of olives and olive oil. And I was like, I wonder what the price of olive oil is today. The entrepreneur trading commodity part of me from back in the day was just like, what's the price of olive oil? And then
I
it was
love it.
like olive oil at all-time highs. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then I was like, who's growing olive oil, or like who's growing olives back, in my hometown in Bakersfield? And I search and I find like one family farm, and I just like call the guy. I'm like, hey, I'm doing some research, wanted to learn more about olives. Like, would you be down to meet up? And he's like, yeah. And he's actually this really cool, like now we've become good friends. And like, that's who I actually went to this concert with last night. And he's like a 5th generation farmer, but his grandfather at like 87 years old decided that instead of planting like almonds or pistachios, he was going to plant olives for
Wow.
anything new. And obviously for like, drought reasons and things like that, but he chose olives. And so I've been out at these olive farms on the outskirts of town here. And then like he gave me a couple of bottles, and, I've just been learning more because oils in herbal practices are super important to us. And me being a very, vata pitta, but having a lot of vata, you know, um, constitution, oils is like big priority for me, and like getting good quality oils in. And so he gave me a couple of bottles, and I just been like pulling off this thing like 5 times a day as I walk by it in the kitchen. Um,
I
but
love that.
it's really interesting of how, because I also was like, yeah, like, I mean, olive leaves are used medicinally. And then the other day I was like, what are the energetics of olive leaves? And like, what are olive
Mm.
leaves used for? And just starting to look at, those uses. Some, say it's good with circulation. There's some viruses that I think it's super potent with. So it was just cool. Like I've just been totally down a olive oil rabbit hole the past 2 weeks. It's been a
I love
blast.
that. That's fascinating. I didn't realize that olive oil was at an all-time high, and I'm not surprised. um, yeah, I very coincidentally yesterday I had a friend come over who's had kind of like a dry, like brackish cough recently, and he was asking me if I had anything for him, and so I made a little bit of mullein tea. So like going back to mullein, just to like help kind of soothe that and provide some like mucilage in a sense. Like gave a little marshmallow, gave the rundown on doing a cold infusion with that, and then I have an olive leaf extract that I made in glycerin, like an olive leaf glycerin with leaves from this massive grandmother olive tree that had been that is in the courtyard of my old home here. Huge, like hundreds of years old. Maybe
Wow.
the biggest olive, I mean, definitely the biggest olive tree I've seen in California, like
Wow. Big
ginormous.
medicine.
Yes, big medicine. And there was a day of landscaping where like landscapers came through and just took off so much of this tree, which I was very upset about because it was providing me a lot of shade and like comfort
Mm.
in the hot summer sun here. But I obviously salvaged as much of it as I deemed necessary, and I made a glycerate with it. And so I personally haven't worked with olive leaf medicine too much. I love that you just broke down those um, like different uses of it for medicine. I remember reading that it's helpful for like sore throat as well. So I ended up straining out a little bit of the olive leaf extract yesterday, and I tried some, and it's so good. And I had my friend Ember try it, and they like instantly were like, wow, like I feel like this is doing exactly what I need it to, and the taste is really good. And yeah, it's really cool that you just brought that up because
Nice.
yeah, olive leaf is one that I'm now exploring, and I feel like my ancestral roots are loving it too.
Yeah, for sure.
So now I feel like I need to, like, pour myself a bottle of it and just see like what comes through with it. Although I don't really feel like I have any specific needs right now. It's fun to still explore.
Yeah. Can you tell us about, what would you classify as a brackish cough?
Oh, so I would just say like where, I don't know if brackish is even the right word, but it just isn't productive. So it just feels like it's like dry and um like like a strong cough, yet that doesn't have a lot of resolution to it, that feels like it's just like creating havoc, like wreaking havoc in your system versus like actually having some sort of productivity where your body's like letting out whatever is creating the cough in the first place. So mullein has an expectorant quality to it that helps bring out whatever is like looming, that extra gunk in there. Plantain is also actually good for that. If you could do a plantain combination, that just helps pull out gunk. It does it topically, but it can do it in the lungs as well. And same with like, you can use it in combination with red clover, and like that will help like create some sort of, almost like agitation in the lungs in a positive way that will help remove that excess mucus or whatever is in there that's creating that. And part of it could be like not even like gunky mucus, but air quality in general. You were saying earlier, like mullein is such an air purifier. And so I feel like when it works in the lungs, it works to help clean up the lungs as well in that way.
Yeah, which is so contrary to what most people, if they're not working with herbal energetics, would think, right? You go to the store, you see the commercials, and it's, stop the cough, suppress it. Excuse me. Here we go. It's typically try and alleviate the symptom. Whereas, in the vital traditions that we're kind of working in, it's actually, hey, no, the cough is a good thing. And if it's not productive, then let's actually use a plant that's going to make it more productive, it just makes so much sense, right? But I think our attention has been turned to everything is bad. A fever's bad. Diarrhea is bad. All these things are bad. It's actually like, no, your body is having an extremely intelligent response right now. And our job is to actually facilitate that in order to make it as productive as possible to then carry you through and support that. And so, yeah, like you're saying, even, like some people, the idea of, I'm losing my voice now. Excuse me 1 second. For some people,
have to get you some olive leaf.
Yeah, some olive leaf. For some people, it's like if you were to tell them, like, yeah, actually, this herb is going to irritate your lungs or your throat or something in order to get this up, it would be like, why would I want to do that? But it's actually brilliant when we think about it from that perspective of, oh, you want to get this out sooner than later and not carry it for another 7 to 15 days that you don't need to. But yeah, I also haven't experimented too much with olive leaf, but I'm actually curious about maybe going out to this farm before I leave and grabbing some and then making some tincture back in Peru.
Yeah, I feel like, I love the glycerate of it. It took on the olive leaf flavor so well. And I love using, like high quality, like alcohol in general. I feel like glycerate's really nice for, Vata Pitta constitution, like you were saying, just because it has that sweet quality, and sweet and Ayurveda balances both Vata and Pitta. It's just got this like the cooling qualities that help with Pitta and help like, just bring Pitta back home and chill it out a little bit. And sweet in general is like grounding, it's a grounding taste. It's earthy, like it's got that, it just brings you in. And then it has that downward motion that's good for both Vata and Pitta, because Vata can be like all over the place. Yep. And Pitta too can like kind of have like upward moving energy because it's so like heady and like wants to just like digest everything. But yeah,
but
so
it
I would
can't.
recommend the glycerin. I'm a huge fan of that. If you can make that happen.
What's really funny is the other day I went the other night and I was just going to take a little bit of this golden seal, a couple of drops. I can't remember why. I think I just wanted to try this tincture that I bought to take back with me to Peru. And I was like so disappointed when I realized that I bought a glycerate and not an alcohol tincture.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh, what have I done? Like, no, I have to go buy another one.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was just like so disappointed. And mainly for anyone listening, that would be because, typically alcohol is going to extract a lot more medicinal properties than a glycerate, but a glycerate can be used if it's for kids or someone who doesn't want alcohol, and some different reasons. I know some people that do prefer glycerate though, in terms of possibly extracting some other qualities that maybe alcohol isn't. But as soon as I tasted it, I was like, oh, damn it, I didn't read the label well enough on that one.
That's so funny. I tend to, I do most of my like tincturing and extracting in alcohol, and I rarely use glycerin. I don't know why I used it for the olive leaf, which is also interesting because olive leaf is like kind of a hardier, it's like kind of thick and hard almost. It's not like a super flexible leaf. And you would think like intuitively that one would use alcohol to really break it up and like extract it. But I don't know why I like went glycerin route, and that's the medicine I have right now. So I'm kind of rolling with it. But I love an alcohol extraction. I really like blending the two. I do a lot of like making simples and then combining them and like joining herbal forces and creating like an elixir, if you will, versus, just like a simple. Because I like a little bit of sweet, but I love the pungency of alcohol as well. I feel like that alone is so medicinal. Right. And I did like dry January this year, which like was my first time ever curbing or cutting out any substances for a long period of time. Not that I necessarily use them that frequently, like I'll have like a glass of wine or like a craft cocktail like once a week, but it was really interesting because it was an intentional choice. And I like, noticed that I really could feel the medicinal quality of the alcohol in my tinctures when I would take them, because I didn't stop taking tinctures. I didn't take them as often. Actually, I noticed that like my body naturally decided that I didn't want to take them as much. So I was making many more herbal infusions and teas, doing more abhyanga, like self-oil massage, and taking in my herbs in different ways. But it was really interesting to notice like how subtle of an effect that alcohol has on the system when you take a tincture. And again, I noticed it pretty strongly after taking like a month off of consuming alcohol in general.
Right.
So it's kind of cool. Like, I feel like, it's of course sourcing of your herbs and your plants is of utmost importance, like who grew it, what soil was it grown in, like what practices, what love was given to it. And then also like who distilled the alcohol you're using, like what's the spirit you're putting it into, like is just as important. And I feel like distillation is something I'm really interested in, and like something I want to start learning more about, because I would love to start distilling my own spirits at some point, and like making my own wine and then infusing that with, that's a different process, but like fermenting my wine and then, distilling whatever I distill, making some gin,
Yeah.
And then making
it's true. The alcohol. Yeah. That's something that eventually I also want to dip into a little bit of making the actual distilled alcohol that you make the medicine with. Yeah, I have a couple of friends. There's a guy in the Sacred Valley where I'm at who distills his own, and he actually also like he's a big seed seller, so he sells a lot of like medicinal plant seeds that you can't get around, which is really cool.
Cool.
Um,
Very cool.
yeah, it's honestly interesting of just like listening to you, like say that stuff. It's like it really is like the small local herbalist who's going to provide someone with the absolute best because we care so much. Usually, like it's pretty normal for the herbalist to care so much. And so like there's no brand on the shelf typically. I mean, there might be one or two, but other than that, you can't beat the herbalist who's like, gone through a series of madness in order to find like the exact plant source they want because of the soil and the environment and the grower, and then found like the particular alcohol they like, and then just each little thing in the process that we work with, and that a lot of times obsessiveness that we put into it, it just makes great medicine compared to what a person can get at a store. And it's kind of this really sweet little like distributed network of us around
100%.
the world.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for saying that. Actually, that makes me feel really seen, and like I feel like anyone else that is listening to this who makes medicine. I think one of the biggest things and challenges in moving to Los Angeles was being like completely saturated in capitalism, more so than in the Northeast, where I was surrounded by local farmers and small businesses. And I almost think like my soul made that decision because I needed to integrate into this world of like consumerism and like I guess like just big massive corporate companies that do kind of rule this like subset of the world, and then in turn like so much of the world. And I feel as if my medicine making practice kind of took a back seat because I was a little bit overwhelmed by just how much there is out there. And I have had an online apothecary for the last, I don't know how many years, like since 2018, I'd say. And I was so oversaturated by people selling things, like going to the grocery store and seeing like a wall of tinctures, or just, but not even just tinctures, like everything, just all the things that get sold. And I just decided I didn't want to add to that. And so I feel like I just stopped creating, because why create if it's not going to be shared? And that's not necessarily true. Like I don't actually hold that like affirmation or mantra still. Like I feel like I love to create for the act of creating. But at the beginning I was just like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Like I don't know if I can keep making medicine and selling it, because there's just so much stuff out there already, and people are already so stimulated by being told to buy stuff. And like I don't want to be another one of those people that's telling people to buy stuff because I've made it. And so I really appreciate you saying that, because now the value of my work has like crept back into my psyche. And in the last, like I'd say 6 months or so, my medicine making practice has taken off again, because I ran out of things that I personally need. And I was like thinking to myself, how did I run out of this? And then I realized it's because I was so consistently creating for so long, and I had a good backstock. And now like my backstock has, dribbled out. So it was inspiring to start creating again based off of my own needs versus like the needs of other people. And now, I'm like I really appreciate what you said, because I do agree that, you know, I'm only going to create what I think is the best for myself, because I believe I deserve that. And then if there's extra to be shared, then I get to put that in the hands of my community. And that feels really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely felt my spirit get crushed a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, by like being here and being like, there's just so much stuff and so many
Yeah.
billboards, and gas is so expensive, and like, why would anyone want to buy a tincture from me? No.
Totally. But I also think what you said to start, it's like, usually you don't get put in that position where it's like, okay, like, let's see how much pressure we can exert on Sophia now. Like, will she survive if we put her deeper into Babylon, you know? And I think that it's only when actually it knows that strength is there that it will put us in those situations. And it's important. And I see that happen too. You know, luckily I have really amazing teachers, and it was very clear from the beginning of like, look, if you're approaching this as like run off into the woods, I'm going to start my own thing out here and I don't have to be involved with society and culture, then like, that's not really like how you're going to help heal anything. You know, we have to be participatory at a deep level. And so learning how to participate and to walk these lands and streets in the current state of things it can be quite challenging, but it's also the only place where we actually can help at the end of the day, you know? And so it's kind of interesting to see like when we all go through our evolution, because I was definitely there at one point. I was just like, why aren't we just going into the woods and like not coming back out? You know, like, why don't we just do that? Versus now I'm like, I actually, you know, I had some friends back in the Sacred Valley who were very much like, like, I'm not going back into Babylon at all. You know, like they go home like once every 10 years. And I'm just like, I actually am not that put off. Like I just, now it's more like I see it for what it is, and it's not for me, but I don't think condemning it in most ways is going to help the people who are at the edge of waking up. I don't think me coming in with condemnation for their life and their lifestyle based on their culture, which we're all born into a fishbowl, and you don't know that you're in a fishbowl when you're in a fishbowl. And so it's kind of just like, I think moving toward a deep acceptance of, you know, the world as is, and then making those small movements in our local communities when we can. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's been a struggle the past 3 weeks at certain points where it's just like, oh God, you know, like this dark magic is intense, you know, like watching, like being around when people have TVs on, and I'm like looking at the state of like how heavy this dark magic is and like how much control it has. And for most people to even hear me describe it as like dark magic, they would be like, whoa. You know, it'd be like, what is this guy talking about? But it's like straight up dark magic trying to control a human being. Anyways, I sidetracked us on that one, but
no, I love hearing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think I also too, I think a lot of times, because I came from a very entrepreneurial background before I came into herbalism. So I was always a little bit different than a lot of people who kind of found it in different ways or were raised with plants and all these different things. But I think it's easy to forget that, like, yes, we live in a very fucked up world of capitalism today, but that doesn't mean that like we didn't trade and produce things and sell things for all of our, you know, evolutionary history for the most part. You know, as soon as there was more than one tribe, we were trading stuff and exchanging and doing all these things. And I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up on, you know, not wanting to sell something because that would inherently mean capitalism, versus actually that's a very natural part of being a human being. And it's more of, can we just look ourselves in the mirror at night and be like, yeah, I actually put a lot of intention and prayer into this medicine, and it's really beautiful medicine. I think there's so many herbalists that are doing that, and it's really awesome, you know. And I like to think someday we'll have like some like way to like see like a whole network map of like all the different herbalists, you know, around. I think that'd be epic.
I would love to see that, and I would love to trade medicine with them. And I love what you're saying about that barter system. I think in my ideal world, I was on a call yesterday for a school that I am going to be sharing knowledge with, called Ancestral Arts. It's a really cool herbalism school based in the Bay Area. And we ended our call last night with the instructors all sharing a world that they dream of, because we've entered Pisces season, for following Western astrology. And it's like this dreamy sort of season because Pisces is this watery sign that really it is kind of uncontained in many ways. And so the question was, what do you dream of? And my answer was, I dream of being in a world where we get to skill share and really fortify the strengths and the skills that we have. And we really get to lean or dive into, I should say, what lights us up and makes us feel alive, and grow that, and then be able to barter and trade. And, I love the barter system so much. And, I mentioned yesterday, my friend came over and I gave them some tea and some tincture, and they were like, well, what do I owe you? You gave me all these things. And I was like, you don't owe me anything. I have plenty of herbs, you're fine. And they were like, all right, well, I'll buy you a sandwich from that Italian sandwich shop we're really excited to go to. And that is what I prefer more than anything, is yes, that is a good, I actually really want. I want that Italian sandwich. And,
Yeah.
or trading a health consultation for a photo shoot, or whatever it might be, is I so prefer that, though I love money, and I'm working on owning that frequency of money, and owning money is great. Money allows us to really cultivate the life that we want. It is a great resource. And, reprogramming, where did it come in that money is evil or money is bad, because it's not. It's just been used in dark ways, like you're saying, by people who have a lot of it and who want to keep having more of it, and preventing, or by systems that have, want more. And the way that those systems are in place prevent so many others from not having it, and staying in a space of being enslaved to it, in a sense. And so, yeah, it's been interesting that herbalism has been not only a teacher for me for how to heal my body, but also how to exist in the world, really, and how to be with the systems that are currently in place, and how to maybe transmute them, and how do I want to transform them? How do we want to transform them as a collective? Like you said, what's this map of all the, small community herbalists, or medicine makers, or healers, or, just wisdom keepers of, plant whisperers, all these people, if we can just continue to empower each other, from where we're at, I think there's work that happens. And to what you were saying earlier about, moving to Peru and living in the Sacred Valley, and, having friends who are I'm not going back, and that's a fine choice. If that's the choice you want to make, you'll be vibrating at your own frequency, and that will, ripple out to the world in whatever way it's supposed to. And I also really value those who can leave and come back, and then maybe go again, and just integrate those seeds of knowledge in a more nomadic way, and kind of plant vibration into a new place, and kind of create a little bit of a disruption there of what the frequency already is, or the vibration
I like
already
that you
is.
said that, plant vibration. That's an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah, right? Because you're literally moving from, being in the frequency of the Sacred Valley, which is so potent and beautiful and just epic. Like, it's like so wise and loving and nurturing, and the Andes are like amazing, and there's such practices there that are just, they've been happening for centuries, and of course there's things that aren't great about, there are systems in place there that we would love to.
It's not all sunshine and rainbows.
It's not, and like that's the case in, in like South America, like all over the world, and that being said, like it's not necessarily the people and the human civilization, although that's magical there. It's really like the land, the land is so powerful. And so the fact that you can be there, like let your cellular makeup really like feel all of that, and then come back a new person. Like, how frequently do we like completely change or like shed all of our cells and then become like literally a new person? Is it like every 7 years or something? I think for all your cells. But yeah, we frequently are like, of course, shedding and regrowing in all of our, but I don't know the exact number. I just read it the other day and I was like, wow, that's so cool.
I think it might be 7. You might be right about that. I can't remember personally, but it's not as like long as you would think. Like 7 years is still not a long time, really, when you think about the fact every single cell.
Yeah, completely new person, right? Like regenerating every cell in your body.
Right.
And that is cool because it's like you get to bring all of that regeneration to these other places and again implant that frequency.
Right.
And I think, again, going back to like kind of the story I was telling earlier, just like the witnessing of myself, I really was like kind of nervous because I always like to think of myself as being a disruptor, someone who's going to bring some different vibration to a space that might need some sort of like resurrection, if you will. Not always. Like, I'm definitely not a perfect person. I definitely have like low frequency days. I definitely get caught in like negative loops and thinking patterns.
We're gonna have to make that into a meme. Be like, today's a low frequency day.
It's a low frequency day.
It's a low frequency day. I've never heard that before. It's perfect.
Yeah, like if you're gonna need me to like help like up the mood today, like it's not gonna be me. Like I can bring you some like calendula or some St. John's wort. Like I can offer these things, and like maybe that is my ability to help, but it's not gonna be me.
So
but a lot of the time it is, and I do work to like uplift. I feel like that's something that I really would call in if I was like thinking about what my like life's work is definitely to help uplift or inspire others to be more uplifted, but that takes a lot of work. And again, like I think in coming here, and I don't know how long this chapter is going to be, but just in the thick of it, I almost like really lost that. And I was like, whoa, I see how people's like souls get sucked out coming to this place. Like, I don't know. And, again, like finding community, I think is really important. Finding people who are, interested in the same things you're interested in, or at least like maybe not the same things, but have the same level of like passion and excitement for like evolving and bettering.
It really comes down to the people. Like even in the Sacred Valley, like it's a really gorgeous place, but without having great community around, I still think it's challenging, to just be anywhere. When I got back to the States, it was like one time walking into Starbucks, and then like the next day you're like, oh, I could go get a coffee again. You're like, they got me already. Fuck.
Yeah. I remember, I think I might have told you this story, but I remember when I got back from, like I had spent 3 months in Peru in 2017. And it was incredibly transformative in many ways. It was my first solo trip, and I was backpacking, and I also had a really severe case of psoriasis that I like. It basically came on like 3 weeks before I left for Peru. And I had psoriasis since I was 7 years old. However, I'd never had a case like this severe. And it was basically, a stress response where, I had just gone through a really bad breakup. I had quit my job. That was like my beloved community job of, being in a space. It was this really cute little like organic grocery store. And we were just like a space where people came who were all sorts of, yoga instructors and meditation teachers and local farmers, and just such a community hub. And it really, that place had really opened my eyes to the community that was around me. So I'm so forever grateful for that place. But I had quit my job there because it came under new management, and the new management was like not at all in alignment with like the previous management, who were like my mentors in many ways. So broke up with my job, moved back to my parents' house, big stuff. And then I was asked to get the yellow fever vaccine from the people who I was going to be like staying with off grid in Peru, like up in some place in the Sacred Valley, like deep in the mountains. And I, in hindsight, I think that they asked us to get that vaccine out of a liability thing. Probably, versus us actually really needing to get it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But at the time I, was traveling solo and was nervous, and I was like, am I going to get yellow fever? Because they were like, we highly recommend you get this. I remember that was the wording, which was interesting because this was like a permaculture, like plant program. And I don't know, whatever, yeah. Regardless
seem contrary to what we would normally make an assumption about.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So regardless of whether or not it was a liability issue for them or they really wanted us to get this yellow fever vaccine, I went and got this yellow fever vaccine, which is a live vaccine. And so, on top of all of this like heart aching stress my body was going through, I went and got this live vaccine injected into me. And within 12 hours, I had a full body reaction that started with what looked like hives, like all over my arms, very like rashy, very itchy, very red, very inflamed. And I was like slathering on, like plantain oil and like calendula and cannabis oil. I had a lot of different cannabis salves and all this stuff, and nothing was working. Or was working very short term. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up going to the hospital because, my parents started freaking out, and they were like, you have to go to the hospital. And I was like, I don't want to go to the hospital. And then that just made it that much worse. It was a very stressful experience. And then what ended up happening was it ended up being an incredibly severe psoriasis, like just outbreak on my body. I had this crazy like all over my body. So my immune system just freaked out. I think like, again, my nervous system was already super depleted, and my immune system was probably depleted too. And then I got this vaccine, and suddenly like huge reaction in my body. And, I had it like all over my arms and like my neck, which was really uncomfortable when I would try to sleep. Like my whole neck was covered in psoriasis, like under my chin. It would get like just like flaky, and then like has this like liquid quality to it. Just like really atrocious, and it was on my face, and I literally felt like a monster. Like I didn't like physically I felt so uncomfortable because like my my whole abdomen, and so that was, I mean, definitely one of the most challenging experiences of my life, for sure. Like covered in scales and like not really knowing what to do, because the things that I knew, at this point I had done my like Ayurvedic counselor training, and I was like constantly continuing education, and I like had all of this information of like how to help heal myself, but I didn't see any of it working. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And so I, almost didn't go to Peru. I almost canceled my trip because I was in such pain, like physically, mentally, spiritually. But I remember I was with one of my friends who came and bought like the last of the herbal preparations I had. I had, basically sold everything that I had because I was going on this trip. And she came by and picked up like a few bottles of tincture and a salve. And she was like, "Are you still going to go to Peru?" And I was like, I don't know. And she was like, "If you don't go now, like you will never go. Like, if it's not yes, like it will never happen." And I remember her saying that. And I was just like, I'm going to go to Peru. Like I have to go, like there's no not going. And so it was really challenging. I like really like applaud my parents because, at that point, again, I had never like necessarily traveled that far away to, lands that, were unfamiliar, in such a sick state. And they like just were like, "You got this, like go do the thing," like Greek parents, like they are worried and they want their firstborn child to be safe, and so I really like applaud their ability to like trust in me, because then that put trust in myself. And then I just went and did the thing, and it was incredibly challenging. I mean, I was in severe discomfort for a lot of it. I had to do a lot of tending, but I went to the like herb shops right away. I got to Cusco and I was like, all right, I have to find the local herbs that like might help me with my skin. And I don't remember there being anything that like really, really stuck out, except munya, which is like Andean mint, which I was, got a couple creams of that and was drinking a lot of that mint tea, and it was just soothing and yummy. And then of course, like, there was coca tea everywhere. But that wasn't necessarily for like skincare. It was more so, I think, such an amazing like ally for just like your mind and nervous system. And I
that
love
land.
it.
Yeah.
And the
like
land.
It's
like
just like being on that land with coca leaf is just like meant to be for some reason.
Yeah, I mean, it grows everywhere and it's a beautiful plant. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely like got the vibe. I feel like it holds the energy of that land for sure. To take coca leaf and, in ceremony and really like respectfully, reverently enjoy it. So beautiful.
So what happens next? Do we find an herb, or you continue on? You sit in some ayahuasca ceremony, everything changes. Like what happens next?
Honestly, so I spent the first month like just journeying through Cusco and the Sacred Valley, go to Machu Picchu, Ollantaytambo, like do all this, travel alone, make some really amazing friends. I actually met a distiller. I wonder if it's the same person.
In Ollantaytambo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know of them. It's a different guy actually, but I know the guy whose family has that spot.
Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, that was cool. And just, like, again, got plugged in a little bit to what was going on, met some locals, befriended them, and just had a time. Again, feeling like I was this like weird shell of myself, because I really kind of was like, I had shed so much of like my identity. where like I had, again, like released so many things that were like, this is who I am, like this, I'm in a relationship and this is what I do for work and like yada yada yada. And so I had all this like identity shedding, and then I literally was shedding skin. Like I was shedding so much
Epic.
skin. And
Epic.
I also didn't have, like, I realized so much of, you know, that was a great testament to like me learning about what true confidence is, because I was not confident in like my outward appearance at the time. You know, I like felt like so much of my, you know, 20s, I was like, oh, I'm like kind of cute. Like I like how I look. And I couldn't lean on that because I didn't like how I looked. I actually looked really sick because I had this like stuff all over me. And so I didn't have that to lean on either. So I really had to like dig deep. Like, who am I? What am I doing? Like, what are my beliefs? What's my energy? Like, is there sweetness that comes out of me, or like, am I like cynical, you know, or who, like, what's going on? And yeah, I mean, as far as the plant teachers that came through, I mean, I was at this place called Paititi, which is like, I
That's
don't
so
really
funny. My
know.
buddy apprenticed there a long time ago.
I wonder
Yeah.
if what was their name?
Um, his name is Zach.
His
Zach
name is
was
Zach.
there. Yeah, but he
Okay.
was there. He was there probably in the past 5 years, maybe at some
Okay.
point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. This
But
was a little
Roman
longer.
is the guy who runs
Yeah.
that, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Roman and Cynthia. And there's a whole crazy story about like my integration with them and like how they were woven into my life prior to me even coming to Peru. Uh, that, yeah, it was just meant to be. So like
Hmm.
that was a whole thing. Lots of synchronicity there. And yeah, I went and stayed on that land, and they, you know, had plant initiations. I went because it was a permaculture program and I was interested in learning about
Right.
like farming and like regeneration and working with soil and building compost. And also because there was this plant initiation, which was sitting with Aya and sitting with San Pedro, who I didn't know at the time at all. You know, I wasn't really familiar
Hmm.
with San Pedro. And I did a dieta prior. You know, I wasn't really eating a lot of like foods that were like inflammatory in general because I had this skin thing going on. So I was, you know, avoiding most dairy and meat, and um, not eating any nightshades. So I wasn't eating like tomatoes or potatoes or eggplant. I was really focusing on just eating like simple grains, some like greens, some fruit. Like I was drinking a lot of like juices from the markets, lots
Hmm.
of ginger and turmeric. I still to this day cannot believe like I would get like a giant fresh juice for like $1. Like it's
They're
insane.
too much. I went like a week before I left and I ordered one and I was like, I can't even begin to drink all of this. Like it's like 3 glasses too many after I've already had 2 glasses, you
Yeah,
know?
they're such like
Yeah.
abundant beverages. I'm like,
Yeah.
whew. But it was good for me at the time because it was like almost doing like liquid fasting in a sense, where I was just drinking juice. And yeah, it was an amazing time period. And I went after a month and like did this, you know, crazy hike to get up to their land. I don't know if you've heard about like just the voyage to get to that land, but it's
No.
pretty intense. You like leave Pisac and you go, I think it's like, to my memory, like maybe 3 to 4 hour drive
Wow.
up into mountains. And then from there, you take all your stuff and you hike for like 2 hours. And you're like hiking these super small trails that are like very precarious in certain parts. And I had a severe fear of heights, and I was like walking on the edge of cliffs with like a raging river below me, like very much like fall to your death situation. I was so scared. Like, it was like maybe the most scared I've ever been in my life, like doing this hike. And I had to develop like a walking mantra while I was doing it, which I still use to this day when I'm like in any sort of situation that is scary. And I I like ended up finishing the hike. I was like the second person to like land on the land because I like got this like divine energy poured into me that I was safe, and I ended up just like supercharging it at the end and like climbing the mountain and made it to the land. And um yeah, and then it was just like living there for a while and living in my tent. And so that was really the medicine. Like,
Yeah,
I did
exactly.
I did the plant ceremonies. Ayahuasca was what initially called me to Peru, which sounds so cliche, but it's true. I initially got the call while I was smoking a blunt. So Northeast, like smoking like a blunt in New Bedford, Massachusetts. It's so funny. And like of like some homegrown weed that like my friend grew. And I like it was just like, what do I do next? And this was like months prior to me having this crazy psoriasis outbreak and everything. It was prior to all of it. I was just like, what's next? And like this like a word started floating in my head, and I was like, what is that word? And it was just like ayahuasca. And I was like, what? And it was and I'm like, dude, what? Like, no, like I'm not gonna like go do ayahuasca. Like, although I had done plenty of like entheogenic, substance, like I was in ceremony with many of those things, but it was so bizarre. It was a bizarre calling. It was like this weird, like ethereal, whimsical, like voice that was just like ayahuasca. And
That's hilarious.
yeah, it was. And so I like was like, well, who am I to not listen to that call if that's like really what I'm supposed to go do right now? And so I called me, I would say. And it was interesting too, because like at the time it was really random. Like I hadn't been talking to anyone about ayahuasca. Like it wasn't on my consciousness. It was just something that came in. And I did some research. I started reading that Jeremy Narby book, and which was another synchronicity because the person who owned How on Earth, that little market that I worked at, was really good friends with Jeremy Narby and like gave me that book and like around that same time and was like, you need to read this book. And it was just all divine. And I was like, I'm supposed to be going to this place. So anyway, for me, I only sat with her once. And from what I've learned, you really reap the most benefits when you sit with her more than once, or she maybe comes through more powerfully, or has more to share.
Yeah, I think some people too. I haven't sat that many times, but I think part of it is just getting almost kind of comfortable and like, oh, this is how this is how this energy moves, and you can kind of learn to navigate with it better over time. And then you're not as much like, whoa, whereas like probably the first times it's big. But I think going back to everything you said, like even hearing like the mountain part and all these things, it's like, it's your mythology, right? That's your hero's journey, and everything leading up to that, right? Like you're smoking the blunt and it's like ayahuasca. And then 2 months later, ayahuasca is like, oh, do you really want to go? Because now I'm going to like strip you of everything. I'm going to, play with your skin and your identity and all these different things. How bad do you really want this initiation? And this is a part of the initiation. And I think what a lot of people probably don't know is that like, that's a lot of our work as herbalists, is kind of guiding people to walk that journey, because that's actually the medicine. Like a lot of these plants are only they're there to like prop you up as you go through the journey, right? It's like, you know, you've just fought this battle and you're like, I'm exhausted. And it's like, there's a plant that's like, power up. And, you know, and you're like, do, 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 do. And like, you like,
So true.
and you have all these allies that can come in, but the real medicine is the energetic journey of the deep psycho-spiritual parts of this. And it's so interesting how you got onto this, and not to like change it to myself, but I feel like I've obviously been in, but I feel like there's a new layer emerging of like what is real, true, authentic self-confidence, and what is the energetics that's coming out of me on a daily basis, and seeing like where I am deeply insecure, and for me, it came with like, you know, the ending of a really big phase when I was living in China and India for 5 or 6 years, and then kind of having, you know, a business relationship end with my partner very abruptly, where I was then all of a sudden my whole identity was working on this business in India 7 days a week for years. And now it's completely gone. And it's like, who am I? And, you know, all these different things. And I went the same thing, but I went wolfing initially, you know, and no, actually I went to Brazil to sit with ayahuasca before I started wolfing. But it was like, the initiation was like deep depression, you know, deep anxiety, and like figuring out of then like, okay, something has to change. What am I going to do here? But it's just it was so cool to listen to you tell some of these things, because this is what mythology is, right? It's the realest part of our psychological, our psycho-spiritual experience, you know, and being on that cliff. And I love how you actually shed your physical skin as well. And not only your identity. I'm sorry for that. Like at the same time, I'm like, hell yeah. You know, like that's when you know you're really going through it. And a lot of people would think to like, oh, like I just need to take whatever medication will completely suppress this and get rid of it. And it's so understandable. You know, I feel like I'm actually coming into a newly found compassion and understanding for like, what would I say? Like cosmetic things. I think not being a woman, I haven't always thought about cosmetic things as much. And in the past year, I've had this like calcified lymph node come out on my neck. And what's crazy is that it's been actually with me for like, since I was 6 years old, but it was always on the inside.
Okay.
And I always thought it was like a bundle of muscles that were just like tangled up. But in the past year, it has decided that it's like the energy is changing. I feel like it's wanting to move out eventually.
Yeah.
But like here it is. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I have people who are like, what's that on your neck? And it's just brought me this completely new understanding of anyone who has anything cosmetic, and the type of insecurity that comes with that, or the just kind of, it's bothersome, especially like this is not uncomfortable at all. This is purely cosmetic. It does not bother me in one bit. But when your skin is itching or feels weird and all these things, like it is so difficult to not go grab something that's just going to numb that pain, take it away as quickly as possible. But the real journey is that deeper spiritual experience. And that's what I think a good herbalist does, is it's like, hey, I'm going to walk hand in hand with you through this process. And now you as an herbalist can actually walk people through that because you walk through it yourself, you know. Literally. And you're not, yeah.
Whew, yeah, wow. Yeah, the literal walking through the fire and like literally getting like burned to ash and then transformed, you know? And I mean, with what you're saying about what's going on with the lymph node on your neck, like that reminds me, you're saying the superficial, or not the superficial, you're saying the cosmetic, and I'm reading it as the superficial, like skin. And, you know, in like astro herbalism, Venus is what rules the superficial skin, and you know, amongst other things, other organs of the body. But when you look at the skin, it's Venusian, and Venus is, you know, in mythology, like the the energy of the archetype of beauty and like love and like sex and romance. And it's so interesting because it really is that, where it's like that's what it has a direct effect on when you feel like that part of your body is impaired, is like on the Venusian parts of you, the parts of you that like love yourself, you know, and it like, it makes you dig deeper. And so, yeah, I just like making that connection of being like, it's all Venus, baby. And learning how to, you know, dive into what's the deeper layers of Venus inside of me, when my skin's like, you know, not doing so great, or when I have a physical like thing going on. But yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying about the herbalist being someone who can help to guide and walk people through that journey. And it is so true, because when you start leaning like into herbalism as a practice, and when you turn to it and you're like, this is something that I'm calling on because my pharmaceutical allies aren't working anymore. You know, like maybe they worked for a little period of time, but you started noticing some effects, or you just don't want to use them at all because you're afraid of the effects. Again, like I agree with you. I actually, in being somebody who's like moved deeper into our crazy society, have like started to realize the value of like low dose medications for some people, you know, and being like, that might actually be exactly what they need. Like I can give you skullcap and oak straw. I don't know if it's going to do what you need as quickly as you need it. You know what I mean? And so in that case, like, again, I know like it's an old cliche, but everything has its place and its time. It's just like not what you do, but how you do it. So how is it used? You know, what's the dosing? But going back to it, like when people do start to like be like, I'm curious about this natural path, or I'm curious about herbalism, I'm curious about Ayurveda, I'm curious about TC, like whatever it is they're interested in, that's when you have to start looking at yourself, you know, and like that's when, like you're saying, like the journey is not just getting prescribed, you know, using hydrosols on your skin because it's dry. It's looking at why is your skin dry, or like why is your gut inflamed, like what's going on, you know, how are you talking to yourself, you know, obviously like what are you eating and all those things, but like also how are you treating yourself, you know, and like what is going on a deeper level, because the herbs also do not work in my experience unless you're willing to allow them to, unless you're willing to be like, I'm an open receiver of this, you know, I'm open. And you can't really be open, again, in my experience, until you really have been broken open. And like sometimes that's really jarring and like super uncomfortable and painful.
So true. Put that on your form for finding out if you want to take a client or not. Be like, have you been drugged through the mud recently? Are you feeling broken down?
How broken are you on a scale of 1 to 10?
On a scale of 1 to 10, how shitty do you feel? And have you finally collapsed on your face and ready to acknowledge?
It's so true.
My gosh. Yeah.
I'm working at this place, like this little like not clinic, it's like a small company in Venice, and the focus and emphasis of the company is on gut health. And so I'm a health coach there, and one thing I really like about the form that we use for clients there is like the question, like how committed are you to transforming your health on a scale of 1 to 10? And it's interesting to see where people answer, you know, like oftentimes like people fall in like the 7-8 range. You know, I think I've seen 110. And I feel like I want to like now couple that question with like, how broken are you? On a scale of 1 to 10, and like see, you know, even maybe that won't be the phrasing, but
Yeah, maybe
It really
something
is.
like how difficult is life getting now? You
How
know, but like
challenging. Yeah.
something poking into that space to see like really because I mean I agree. You know, one of my teachers will always say, you know, he's just like plants are participatory, which I think for a lot of people that sounds just like, whoa, like what does that mean and all these things? And it's like, yeah, I mean, these plants have constituents and like 60% of your biomedical, you know, pharmaceuticals are made, you know, by either concentrating these plants or synthetically recreating them. How could it be that it's like there's this participatory part? But that participatory part is how you actually start to move toward, I don't want to say causation, but source, right? You start to move toward the source because it's like, hey, your stomach's inflamed. Okay, well, it's because you're eating these things, but then it's like, well, why are you eating those things? Or why are we, you know, like for me, it's like I know that I overeat because I'm not able to sit with whatever emotion is coming up at that point in time that I have not been able to transform that emotion yet. And
Mm.
so it's like, yeah, I overeat. And now it's kind of like, well, hopefully I can just overeat things that are, quote, better for me. But it's still overeating at the end of the day. That's still putting stress on my system. But at least I know that over time, my end goal is to actually at some point be able to process that emotion underlying that urge and craving and addiction to overeat, and that's actually what's driving some of my inflammation or gas or bloating. But at least I know that like that's where I'm going, even though that may take me
Yeah.
5 or 10 years or a
Yeah.
lifetime. But I'm
Hmm.
not like, you know, I'm not just thinking that like, oh, I'm going to take this thing, I'm going to change what I eat, and then everything will be different. You know what I mean? And I think it's hard initially. And yeah, I don't know. I just think that like that's kind of like it's challenging to get people to understand that if they haven't had like a maybe a personal experience with anything like that, you know, which is I think
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Nothing's gonna fix you, like nothing can just fix you. There's no magic cure. Again, that's like a cliche. I've heard that my whole life. Like, there's
Hmm.
no magic cure to like feel happy or, um, because like unfortunately, like you do have to look at yourself in order to but it's not unfortunate, it's just hard, it's a challenging thing to do sometimes because you see the parts of yourself that are kind of ugly or like what you would deem ugly or like deem bad, but they're not bad, they're just there. And it's
Hmm.
like you're saying, like I like the overeating example where it's just like, well, yeah, what is this emotion that I'm trying to like maybe stuff down or um like to just not have to deal with it, like what's actually bubbling up. And often when we actually sit with whatever that thing is, like for me, like I am very impulsively angry sometimes, like I'm a very like it surprises people when I tell them that, but it's because I'm such a passionate person, and this like passion that comes out of me like sometimes turns into like hostile anger.
Yeah.
And especially to those close to me, and like I have really been like working on it as much as possible, where I'm like, what is this anger that's pouring out of me, like what does this come from, like why, what's it triggered by? But that's tough work, and like I'm not anywhere close to fully solving it by any means.
Yeah.
However, I know it's something, again, the awareness of self, I think, is always like where you start. And, I also realize that like if I continue to stay angry, or if I continue to let like anger be an experience that drives my actions or my words, that will ultimately have like a physical effect on my body. I know that well enough that the mental and psychological space really can affect the physical space. And I, for myself, like just know that like, okay, if I'm having this well up of emotion happening, like I do need to work on it. I need to set time aside daily, if possible, to like go into that feeling and to explore it a little bit, because I don't want to have long-term effects on like my liver, for instance, because I'm harnessing all this anger, or, and that's directly related to the fact that I am prone to chronic psoriasis, and like, although I managed to clear my skin, and like we can go back into that story if you want to hear the end of it, but like it's not really ended, like I still have psoriasis on my scalp sometimes. But again, like most of that cleared up because of releasing a lot of pent up emotion, a lot of, processing of sadness, and like, and then just creating joy too. It doesn't always have to be like, oh, I have to go like into like this horrible feeling, because that doesn't always make you feel better. Like, yes, cathartic crying is really helpful. And I do feel like crying is really important, and healing. Water is just an important like healing element. But I also think like you can heal parts of yourself that are hurting by creating balance in the opposite, direction. So it's like, yeah, I can go explore this anger that I'm experiencing and like be like, oh yeah, it's obviously sadness underlying. Like, where's the sadness coming from? Like, what's the childhood memory? Like, whatever, all that stuff. And also like I could choose to like create humor, and like I could choose to be happy. Like I could create joy as well, And with the whole saga of like going to Peru, the experience was the medicine. I was a teacher because I went there because of her. She called me. My actual ceremony with Aya, Roman had said, who was, our shaman, he sat with us the day before and kind of like prepared us a little bit. And he was like, we're all in a group together. Everybody who's sitting here is a Sangha. We're, doing this. We're going to have this experience together, and it's going to be a collective like medicine holding, and we're one organism when we all sit together, and we'll all have our own unique experiences, but at the end of the day, it's one collective. And he described it, and he was like, one person will be the head of the dragon in the group, and like another person will be the tail of the dragon in the group, and where everyone else lies is like on the body of the dragon. And I was so sick, and I had all of this previous psychedelic experience, going to music festivals and eating a lot of acid and also like going into nature and eating a lot of mushrooms and, being a stoner. And I was like, I am the head of the dragon. Like, ayahuasca, call me in. Like, I will be the head of the dragon. I remember thinking that to myself, which is, I remember having that thought because at the time of having such like low self-esteem and feeling so like bad about myself, although I had like little wins of even just like being there in the first place, I had this like aggressively, I don't want to say confident because it's not confident, like cocky, I guess is the word, like aggressively like cocky thought that I was going to be the head of the dragon. And we sat with the medicine the next day or the next night, and I didn't feel a single thing.
Oh,
like I did not have anything. I felt like I barely experienced anything. I just sat there. It was a deep meditation. I was so aware of everyone around me having an experience. And I felt like I could go into their experience, and like, I felt like I could identify what was happening in the placement of those around me, although I couldn't see them because it was like pitch black in there. And, but I remember this woman, Annika, who was like she was sitting like almost directly across from me in this giant room. And she was having a profound experience. She was like talking to fairies and like having conversations out loud and like screaming and crying and laughing. And she had never had a psychedelic experience in her life before. and she went in, and she was the head of the dragon and I was the tail of the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it was this really crazy, incredibly humbling experience, because I was honestly like kind of distraught at the end of it, where I was like, I came all this way like to do this medicine, to take this medicine, and like I didn't even get anything from it. You know, like at the time I'm like, I didn't even get anything from this. Like I didn't see anything. I didn't like release any of my demons. Like I didn't, you know, go into past lives. Like I didn't see the spirit, like the grandmother spirit, like come to me and tell me anything wise. Like I had none of it. I just sat in the room for like 6 hours in darkness and listened and heard everything else going on around me. Like I didn't purge, you know, I didn't even go outside. And, you know, when I've shared this with others, they're like, oh, you probably just didn't drink enough. But I got seconds, and like I drank enough ayahuasca. I drank just as much as everyone else. I just really genuinely think that the medicine was for me to not have an experience, because the medicine was to be there, you know, and to be humbled. Really, it was very humbling.
I mean, you would have, if you would have had a really strong experience, then you probably would have came out with a huge amount of inflation. And it would have been like, look at me, I'm now, you know, going to pursue shamanhood and all these different things. And it would have been much different. But I mean, this is something that a lot of people, if you don't have any experience as well, the intelligence of those plants is so far beyond ours. It's so absurd. Far beyond. To me, it's like one of the main reasons to like do it. Like, even if you don't get into any of your trauma or any of the things you think you know, are there to do, to just experience that intelligence. But I've watched it plenty of times, and I know plenty of stories where you could have the same medicine, the same dose. Someone will take it the first night, and if they're not ready and she knows it, she either won't give them a journey, or she might give them like diarrhea, because she's like, well, you're actually here for a party, and your intention is like more just like, I'm here to like do these things and I'm experimenting. And she's like, all right, you're going to get diarrhea until you like decide that you want to honor my spirit. And 100%. Then maybe by the next ceremony, they've actually processed a little bit, and then the exact same dose, the same medicine made by the same people, all of a sudden they'll have an experience that time that's like, you know, a massive experience. And it's to me, it's one of the cooler ways that she works, actually. Like, I always think it's interesting.
I was so radically humbled by that experience, you know, and I remember feeling like almost like a hollowness after, and like total ego lysis. Like my ego had just like was a balloon that popped. And there was one message that came through very strongly, consistently. And it was this question, and it was like Aya saying to me, like, why are you here? Like, you know exactly what you need to do. Like, why are you here? You know exactly what you need to do. And it was really as simple as meditating and like having a meditation practice and going inside and going inward. Because I think at the time I was like seeking so much outward validation and like, you know, outward experience and stimulation and like the sensationalism of being a human in the world and like being outward all the time. And it was like just this deeply humbling and almost like being seen so just poignantly of being like, why are you here? Like, you know exactly what you need to do. And that's to just be with yourself. Like, go be with yourself and then like come back when you're ready, you know? And exactly what you're saying. Like, I feel like I was there because I was looking for something to help fix me and like to help fix what was going on in my life. And I was just like, fuck no, that's not me. Like, you are here. I called you here because you are supposed to be here and you're supposed to have this experience. And also you need to do the work on yourself first and foremost. And I haven't actually sat with ayahuasca since then. And I do think one day, like if and when the time is right and I'm in the right setting, like I will 100% be open to sitting with Aya again. But like you said, I do think like, you know, my experience, although it wasn't outwardly or like, you know, it wasn't this deeply psychedelic experience, was exactly what I had to have.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, you know, we did sit with San Pedro quite a bit. And I have to say that San Pedro, which was a plant that I was not familiar with, Huachuma, was not, again, not something energy that I knew of. More of like a kind of like a fatherly energy, right? Like that's how you would describe it. In sitting with San Pedro consistently, I got a lot of benefits. That was like a healthy masculine teacher for me, like healing, you know, the wounded masculine inside of me, which was very much like toxic masculinity that we all carry. And that was like really harming my feminine spirit and my feminine energy and like my receptivity and my openness and like so San Pedro we worked with as a powder. We did a couple of like full ceremonies with San Pedro as a powder, and then that was my first like microdosing experiences as well, because while we were working the land, we would like take little microdoses of San Pedro, which I thought was really kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I lived there for a little over a month. I spent a lot of time hiking. Like there are 3 gardens on the land. The garden that's by the kitchen. There was a riverbed garden that you hiked down to the river, and there was like, you know, lots of fruit trees there, and then there was the Cherimoya garden, which is like you hiked for like an hour up the mountain. The first time it took like an hour, and then you got stronger because you were living on a mountain, like in your tent. So it was really cool. By the end, I could like do that hike in like 20 minutes, like no problem. And you'd be like up in this incredible place, like up high on a mountain in this garden, just surrounded by plants and herbs and kale and giant cherimoya trees and just beauty. And the San Pedro like microdoses were helpful for those experiences, because San Pedro like has been, to my like memory and knowledge, was, you know, is used by locals to connect deeper with the land, and is said to have an effect on you that like makes you almost more like animalistic and primal, like more like the cougar or the puma, you know, like where your senses become sharpened and you just feel more agile. At least like that was my experience. Like I felt like more agile. Like I was more like a cat, like roaming the mountains. And the deeper experiences with San Pedro, when we would, you know, be in ceremony as a group, or when we prepared fresh cactus once and made, you know, the fresh juice. That was really powerful. Like that was, you know, I felt really alive, and I felt the vitality flowing through my body, and there was a joy. And then, you know, I remember on the ceremony where we prepared the fresh cactus, I just fell into like, it was very different than the other experiences with the powdered cactus. I went into like a deep melancholy, and I was feeling so bad for myself, like just such deep self-pity. And it was really interesting because it was so interesting, because I was like in this space where like I felt such self-pity. Like I was like, oh, like I'm such a victim of the world. And like, I'm such a victim because like my skin is so inflamed and I'm in so much physical pain and everyone else is fine and having a great time. And like, and then like there was this other really potent energy coming through while like my ego is having this experience that was just like, get over it. Like literally get over it. Like stop victimizing yourself. Like nobody is going to save you. Like you're not a victim as much as anyone else is in the world. Like you are responsible for how you feel. Like get the fuck over it. And it was really like a very intense wake up call. And it was like this like firm father figure just being like get it together. Like, yes, you're in pain and yes, that's valid. And yes, like, but like, don't let that like take over your life and your experience and pull you from being present where you are. And, you know, like be with what is and be okay with it, you know? And like, if you're not okay with it, do something about it, but don't just wallow. And, you know, I feel like that was a big teacher for me, like that moment, because like we had taken it in community and in Sangha, and I was definitely pulling the group down. Like I'm sure energetically everyone was feeling that there was like someone in the group that did not want to participate in the Tai Chi that we were doing by the river. Like I was very checked out and like in such deep like egoic pain that it needed to get corrected. And like I do feel like there was a moment there where like I had to just like kind of be shaken awake a little bit. And it came through like with San Pedro as like a consciousness that was in my body and my mind, and then also in the form of another person. The chef at Paititi at the time, his name was Elton, and he and I had an interesting dynamic. I feel like we had like very like sibling, like a sibling dynamic kind of. And we're not supposed to speak when you're like in San Pedro ceremony, right? Like you're communicating telepathically, like pretty strongly. And he came over and he like sat with me, and I don't even know if there were actually words that were exchanged, but he like came over and it was that same exact energy, like download of being like, get over it. Like, you're here, like deal with it. You know, you can't go anywhere. Like, where are you going to go? Like, you're like 8 hours off grid, you know? So yeah, I have deep reverence for San Pedro as a teacher. I feel like that ended up being like a big teacher for me. I have deep reverence for ayahuasca as a teacher too. I feel like she was like, honestly prepped me for the San Pedro too, because I didn't know, you know, I didn't know what was going to come from that. And then the cocoa was always the thing that just landed it at the end of the night, you know, like sitting in circle, speaking fast and enjoying cocoa with each other and sharing. And I mean, the plants are so beautiful out there. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, I feel like Huachuma is definitely more of my medicine at this point in time. Doesn't mean like I'll never sit with ayahuasca again. It just means that it'll have to be like when it calls. I also think it's great though. Like most people, you know, there's a lot of old Zen stories from my understanding that like usually the actual enlightened master is the chef in the back. That's like a well-known thing. And so, you know, I'm always curious to like get these like chef stories, because it is a lot of the chefs that hold it down, you know, and they're just like in the back. Actually enlightened. But I thought it was great when you like brought up like a little bit of chef teaching there. It's like,
honestly, it was really, I mean, like I didn't have time to be ashamed or embarrassed of myself really, because it was so obvious that like this was the energy I was carrying. So like,
Mm.
if I felt embarrassed or ashamed, although I did, but like if I really held on to that, it would have just brought the group down further, you know? So it was a quick, like, get it the fuck together. And like, I have to thank Elton for that for sure. You know, like he embodied the teaching, you know?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it is like that. Yeah, my experience, I had a really strong journey this last time, and it was like 12 hours. I did 2 full doses, and it was like we were down there in Dragon Realm for sure. Like it was a heavy lift that night. Um, but that medicine is, for me, it's more navigatable than ayahuasca is for me. Usually I feel like I can navigate with Huachuma a lot better. That Huachuma is in some ways kind of like, hey, if you want to carry a strong intention with me right now, then I'll take you where you need to go, but you kind of need to be very clear that you want to go there. Whereas ayahuasca might just like grab me by the back of the head and be like, do you see that? Like, here's this emotion that you've been avoiding your entire life for all these years. You have no idea what it is or what it means, but it's right here now in front of you. Whereas I feel like Huachuma is much more like, I had one experience at a long dance. That was my first ever Huachuma experience. And, we had to you do 5 hours in a circle to the left around the fire to start. And then you do 5 hours to the right. And essentially it's much more of and it's through the night. You walk through the night. You can't sit down really. You can sit down for like a max of like 30 to 40 seconds. And then the guy's like moving you along, like keep it moving. And
Wow.
it's more of like a land cleansing ceremony than personal in a lot of ways, right? Like it's kind of like the land, you start to create a vortex with the circle, and then the land will bring up anything that it needs to transmute, and it kind of transmutes through us as we're going around in a circle, and whether or not we're playing music and singing and whatever. But you're going round and round. I got my ass kicked that night. It was like the coldest night of the entire winter. And yeah, like my left knee started bothering me, and I needed to drink more medicine. I didn't have like enough, and there was something coming up with like my biological father's side of the family, and I could feel it like bubbling. And then Wachuma like very clearly was like, look, it's right here. If you want to go deeper into this, then you need to go drink some more medicine. If you really want to experience this right now, then you need to go have more medicine. And unfortunately, I just could not fathom like having more medicine with like how bad my knee was hurting. And so I just like wasn't able to get there that night. But I think that moment gave me kind of an indication of like, oh, I do feel like this is more of my medicine, because it feels like all of them are intention based, but I felt like this one was a little bit more easy for me to work with in that way. But what I think is cool is, in like, we can talk about entheogens, forever, but it's like all the plants are working like this.
Oh
Most
yeah,
most
definitely.
people don't realize that, like, if you start consuming chamomile in strong doses and praying to it and working with it every day for a month, you're going to have experiences if you're open to them. Right. And it may not
100%.
be, like you're getting blasted off in like 3D imagery, but it'll be more of like that mythic story that you were telling earlier, where it's like, oh, I was on a mountainside and I was scared, and now I have this like mantra for when I'm scared. You know what I mean? So it may be a song that comes, or like a melody that comes through, or just any other teaching, but they're all there to teach. And that's been more of my path, is just like an everyday, drinking different, what I call, like, I mean, regular, whatever that means, but like kitchen
Everyday
herbs,
herbs.
everyday
Yeah.
herbs.
Garden herbs. I fully agree with that. I feel like for anyone who's, wanting to really like explore the consciousness of plants. You know, it ideally like you have a garden and are able to tend to them and learn from them in their living form, or just, you know, have like a couple of herbs on your balcony or patio or windowsill. But even the dried herbs, like you're saying, like have so much medicine and knowledge in them, where like you're saying, like in the preparation, like what's your intention of making this tea that you're making, you know, and like can you give yourself, you know, like a little bit of time to commune with it, you know, before you're like just unconsciously drinking it. Or same with tinctures or anything, you know, it's like consciousness of plants is so cool. And I've had, you know, moments with plants. Like I have a story of this motherwort plant that I had in my garden on the East Coast. And I had this really epic, massive garden at this place that I lived. It was this like riverside home. I like love rivers.
Wow.
They're definitely
Yeah.
my like, I love oceans too, but rivers, I don't know, something about
Rivers are
them.
my jam.
Yeah. And I lived on this river in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, and I like had this really epic garden. And unfortunately, like the house, there was a lot of conflict between the humans in the house. You know, it didn't start that way, but then it ended that way. There was, you know, some unspoken fear and emotions, and it just never got cleared. And the person who owned the house, my landlord, got involved with some of the problems in the house. So the short of the long is like I was moving out of the home to move to another home that was like beautiful and ended up being like one of my favorite places I've ever lived. But I was planning on continuing to be the caregiver of the land there. It was like a little contract that I had basically with this homeowner and landowner. And I planted, it was May, and I had planted like all the beds, you know, with like hundreds of plants, you know, tons of tulsi and lemon balm and ashwagandha and cannabis. Like I had cannabis that was ready to go. And so all the beds were planted, and then all my vegetables. And then this big motherwort plant. And the conflict between the humans in the home, although I was moving out, like became so great that there was like this issue that just like exploded, that I was like totally kind of in the wrong in, you know, in retrospect. But it just wasn't handled well. And I basically got evicted from the garden.
Oh no.
And it was so painful because I had just put so much time into this garden because I was told I could, you know, tend to it and give it love for the season that was coming up, right? Like it was the beginning of the season. And I just planted all these plants, and it was so sad. And I was just like, damn, like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't leave these plants here. Like, and, you know, there were some things I couldn't dig up because they were like squashes and I don't know, like they were like pumpkins and things that I felt like I put so much time into digging into the earth so they could really root that I was like, I just have to leave them here. But I ended up going on a mission with one of my friends, and we ended up like, you know, carefully digging up the plants that could come with us and transplanting them into my parents' garden that was like, you know, 20 minutes down the road. And then my new house, which, you know, was more of a city house. And had a yard, but like didn't have any raised beds, and I wasn't allowed to build any raised beds at it, which was tough for me. So I ended up having to like repot stuff and put it in pots. And one of the plants I ended up putting in like a giant pot was this motherwort plant. And like for those who don't know, motherwort is an herb that is really helpful for like cardiac tension. Like it helps with the heart and helps heal, issues with the heart physically and also emotionally and spiritually. It's a very like interesting plant because it grows, it's in the mint family, and it has these like little thorns that like kind of grow between the leaves and the flowers. And so when you're processing it, you have to be careful to like, take off the leaves and like not get the thorns in your medicine or on yourself. And so I remember like bringing the motherwort back to my new home that night after like hours of like crying and feeling sad and then also feeling angry and then feeling motivated and then being like, we're going to save these plants and, feeling like this whole journey of emotions. And I brought the motherwort home, and as I was putting it down in its new like place where it was going to live, I like faintly smelled it. And that was fascinating because motherwort is not an aromatic plant. Mm-hmm. It doesn't release scent. And it was the only time that I have ever really smelled motherwort. Like she like released a scent for me. And it was like wild because I had never smelled motherwort before. Like I had taken it so many times, but to really smell like the scent of motherwort. And I like just broke down and like felt all my emotions. And I was like, oh my God, like, I'm so happy you're here. Like, I love you so much. Like, I'm so grateful for this plant. And I felt a lot of softening around my heart and like, just, feeling okay with what was, although it was really hard. And then, my friend and my new roommate at the time, I told her what had happened. And she was just like, well, could it be possible that the motherwort was what orchestrated this whole journey in the first place?
Most likely.
Yeah. Like, could it be possible that she wanted to be close to you and she didn't want you to be living half an hour away and like coming and visiting every so often? Like, what if the motherwort wanted you to like take care of her every day and like be one with these plants and have them in a space where, yes, it was a beautiful garden, but like, what was the energy surrounding the garden? Like maybe the plants wanted to get out. And it was really cool to have that awareness. And like, since then, I've just I've really like, that was a really eye-opening moment that was, quasi psychedelic, and being like, yeah, these plants speak to us and they have their own intentions and they have their own plans and they are orchestrators of our journey. Like they guide us through life. And
Isn't that hilarious to think about? Like behind the scenes, like all these plants are just like pulling the strings, and they're like, "Oh, these silly sapiens like think they're actually like in control and doing all these things and
of us." Yeah.
Like, and meanwhile, they're like, "Oh, she'll be moving next month," and like the landlord, they're like plotting on. They're like, no, wait. What if the landlord steps in now and then evicts her? And they're like, yeah. They're like, let's go with that plot.
It's so wild because it really was a silly like plan as a human. Like be like, oh, I'm moving. Like I'm physically moving everything, but like I'm going to like keep coming back and tending to this land. And, I'm sure I would have done it. I'm sure I would have, but like not to the same degree that I ended up caring for those plants, like being, close to me and also giving them the care of my parents who are amazing gardeners and like love taking care of plants in the earth. And so, yeah, it's really funny to think about. And yeah, they're wild beings, those plants,
For sure. Well, I actually think we should probably stop there for today. I have a meeting actually at 2:30 with like one of the top experts in Korean natural farming
I love
for
that.
for possibly helping out this olive and almond and pistachio grower here in town. So we're gonna have a call with them and see what they can possibly do and try and what are we doing? We're planting vibrations here back in the Central Valley in California, trying to get some natural farming going if we can.
I
So
love it.
I
Great
need
work.
some brain power for that later to just see what's going on. But I had an absolute fantastic time. And I feel like there's just so much more to explore that obviously we could keep going for like multiple hours, but why not, save it. We'll catch up again, at some point soon and maybe dive, into your, more into your practice and, yeah, whatever comes up, it's endless. So I also have some, yeah, when you were talking about Venus earlier and like the Venus stuff is probably really big for me this year. So we can go into that too.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
chat for
yeah.
sure. I
And
love it.
cool. Well, yeah, have a good time in the desert and
Thank
good
you.
luck getting bio oriented.
Thank you.
And I think
Thank you
this
so
was an
much.
awesome, awesome, awesome time. So